So you started out doing stand-up, and then you hadn't done it for 22 years. Why had you stopped initially?
Well, it's hard to know because it's so easy to rewrite history. One reason was because so many of my friends were so good at it, and I really felt like I'm not as good as them, and it bothered me. And I think I was a little bored of myself. I didn't have much to say. I didn't have a strong point of view. I wasn't angry. I wasn't reinventing the form. And then I kept getting jobs as a writer. I was really good at writing in other people's voices. So if Roseanne Barr said, can you write jokes in my voice? I didn't have any problem doing that. It was much harder to do it for myself.
So when you came back to it, do you think that your years of experience being a television writer and a producer and a husband and a father, I mean, that made you better at it? Or do you think, I hope this isn't insulting, or people laughing at you just because now you're a name brand?
Exactly. Well, I think that they laugh for maybe 2 minutes. You know what I mean?
Right.
If they don't know you, they'll ride it a little bit. But if I'm a disappointment, it's a drag. So they don't give you the courtesy laugh for too long.
I see. Does it give you something that the rest of your career doesn't? I mean, what do you get out of it that you don't get from being a director and a producer and a writer?
Well, there's so much you want to talk about that you can't do in a movie. Movies are painful. I mean, when they go well, I usually just feel like I dodged a bullet.
Right.
But a good comedy show makes you happy, and then a bad one, you're like, well, I'll do it again tomorrow. And
right, it's this combustive thing. It happens.
It happens.
It's over, and then you can start again the next day.
But if a movie bombs, I'm not sleeping for a while.
Right.
I've wasted millions of dollars of other people's money. A giant corporation is suffering.
Now, when you, last year you did stand-up at Carnegie Hall and at comedy festivals and also on The Tonight Show, where you killed doing a bit about Cosby. It was your imagining of what Cosby's act would be like today.
Isn't that weird? He's like doing stand-up. What do you think his act is like? Do you think he's still talking about it? You think he like says like, you ever been in trouble with the wife? You ever like get into the doghouse with the wife? You're in the doghouse with the wife because of something that you did. Like the other day, there was something about me in the paper, and I didn't want my wife to read the paper. So I got up at 5 in the morning and I snuck out to the driveway to get the paper. And I hid the paper, and the next day I got up and I hid the paper.
Now, you were an early and really ardent voice against Cosby and a defender of his accusers. Why were you so vociferous about it? Is it because you have 2 daughters? Is it because he was your boyhood hero?
All of that. And I know one of the victims, and I've met a bunch of them since. Wow. And when you meet them, it just becomes very obvious. You know, it's a lot of people with the exact same story. He had an MO, he had a way he was behaving. I don't think there's any question that it's true.
Right.
I felt that someone had to say, let's just be honest, he did this, and we can't let this disappear again. He should pay for his crimes, or he should do something for these women. He's worth probably almost $1 billion. You'd think he could do something thoughtful for these people before he dies, and do something that shows that he understands that he's hurt people. Right. That's what his whole life is about. His whole life is about personal responsibility. So it's very weird for a guy at the end of it to not take any personal responsibility.
Right. But I think what you say, there's a case for reparations. It's kind of interesting about against these women.
Wouldn't it be amazing if out of the blue Bill Cosby just said, I hurt a lot of people, I'm a very wealthy man, these people's lives were forever affected by this, and I'm going to try to do something for them. Would that be the greatest lesson to the world? I mean,
maybe he'll hear this.
I doubt it. I doubt it. What do you think he's watching on TV right now?
Now, I read that you told an interviewer once, quote, people have been trained to think that being amused is what's most important in our country. I think that you said that in relation to Donald Trump, right? And we're all kind of guilty. You know, at the beginning of the Trump campaign, even we in the media sort of viewed it as this delightful joke, and then it got scary. But there is a sense that comedians have become our public intellectuals.
Oh, I think comedians have always pointed out BS. And I think young people have learned to look at the world through that lens. They've looked at it through the Daily Show or the Colbert Report. And I've always said, I feel like a lot of comedy has mocked a lack of tolerance. So that's why I think gay marriage was accepted much faster, because people like Jon Stewart were just eviscerating anyone that would have an issue with it. And so you have a whole generation of people who are much more rational. I mean, we'll see how that ultimately plays out, if that's correct. But I think a lot of young people are taking a second look in a way that hopefully is healthy. The Trump thing is different. It's tapping into all sorts of rage and frustration.
Right.
And hopefully, as people, figure out, this is what he would do, though. Here's what he would do. Do you agree with these steps?
Right.
That they, will realize there are probably better people than him to make these decisions.
Now, your parents were divorced when you were an adolescent, and your mom worked in a comedy club, right, which allowed you kind of entree to round-the-clock stand-up.
One summer after my parents separated, my mom was a hostess at the East End Comedy Club in Southampton. I got to watch all the comedians and all the shows all summer. And sometimes I think, maybe my mom did that just for me. What could she have gotten paid? $100 or $50?
I think that is such a beautiful story. I'm sure she did it for that reason.
On some
I mean,
level.
as a kid, you never think your parent is doing something like that with you in mind, but I'm sure she must have been.
But yet she seemed to enjoy it, but really loved that I enjoyed it. And so I went to every show all summer.
Amazing. I've read that you thought there's a connection between the upheaval of your parents' divorce and you're ultimately becoming a producer and a writer rather than a performer. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was a middle child and a child of divorce, so you become someone that tries to create safety. And I always found safety in working, because I always feel like if I'm in motion, I'll be okay. And as a producer, you take the most damaged part of your psyche and you use it for good. So if you're a nervous person and if you have catastrophic thinking and you're always going, what could go wrong?
Yeah.
As a producer, that's the best attribute, because you're thinking, how many days do we need to shoot this? What would be the appropriate budget? How do we make sure we do it in the right amount of hours? And you can run these problems and solve them all day long because you're a nervous person.